All right. Well, thanks for joining me tonight. My name is Ben John. I've been tying since I was 6 years old. I've had a long line of tying from different classes. I'm going to be tying up three flies for you guys tonight. The first fly is one of my own patterns. It's literally a Ben John classic Euro nymphing pattern. It's called the Jellystone. And the next fly is a Frenchie, and then the third fly is an egg pattern. So starting with the jig fly, for the Euro nymphing fly, this is a size 8 fire pole hook. It is a little bit heavier of a bead on top, just because I like to use a little bit heavier bead on the hook, so that way I don't have to add any more weight to it. It'll get down right away. So I always start my thread normally in about the middle of this fly, just so I don't stack up on the top here in the corner. If you get closer to the eye of the hook, you don't have any room to kind of grow with the fly. So I just bring it down closer to the bend where it starts, and then I'll just cut my access thread off. And then I'm going to add in the tails. They are Spanflex and size medium. And what I'll do is I'll start on one side, make sure that I got that threaded up a little bit, and then I'll pull it down and bring it down to the other side. And what that does, that gives me an even wrap on both sides. And then pretty simple tie. You don't have to. This fly is one of my favorites because there's not a lot that goes into it. You don't have to use a lot of crazy materials that can, you're tying in biots and you're like, oh my gosh, I gotta get this right. It's not splitting just right. With the Spanflex, it kind of just works. It wiggles. It's not really like a stiff tail. Next is going to be V-rib. And I start it on the side. I don't start it on top. I'll start it on the side, and I'll just make sure I wrap it pretty tight going up. And then I stop it right before I get to the Spanflex tails. And then I'll just wrap it right back up. And the reason for that is my next piece of how I actually bring this across. I pull up the tails, because I'm going to cinch them down in. And as I pull that one up, it didn't want to work for me. And I'm going to literally lock the tails in so they stay in whatever position I pull them at. And then I start making my wrap with the V-rib all the way up for the thorax. And everyone tends to tie it a little sparse on making like the head of your fly all crowded. I tend to tie it pretty tight into it, and notice how I actually locked it in from on top. I didn't like wrap it around. I don't do that until the very end of it, just to secure it. And reason why I do that is because V-rib stretches on you. As you start tying it and pulling on it, it'll stretch even more. And then I'm using ice dub. I'm using the new Midnight Haze. It's a bluish, it honestly is probably my favorite ice dub color that's out there. And I'm going to make the first wrap of the collar just to kind of stack it in, making sure that I spin it just right. And I just bring it back just slightly, just so I can push that ice dub back. And we're going to tie in one side of legs at the time. And the first side, everyone always thinks that it's easy to tie in Spanflex. Sometimes it's not, because it doesn't want to work just right. So I just make sure like I get 2 wraps in, and then I secure it. And it's going to look kind of funky at first, just because you have a little bit of excess on there, and you'll just trim that up at the end. And same thing with the side. I do a pinch wrap. I don't know if you guys saw that. I literally take the Spanflex and I pinch right here. I pinch my thread, and the reason for that is when I bring it down in, it puts it right in the position that I want it. And I can only really do it on this left side of the vise. It allows me to have full control of where I want my legs to go. I use that method on a lot of different patterns. And I'm going to take more of the Midnight ice dub, and I'm just going to fill in the rest of the thorax there. And having the ice dub super tight doesn't really help the fly look buggy. I like to have it spread out. Sometimes I'll take a brush, a little dubbing brush, and brush it out a little bit on the bottom just to kind of give it some more bugginess and bug look. And then I'm going to take a whip finish. I use my fingers as a whip finish. I don't use a whip finish tool. It tends to be a little quicker. And I just make sure that's secure there. And then I trim it off. Now, this is where you want to kind of just look at your legs here. You want to get them adjusted. You can kind of move them a little bit. And I'm going to cut the leg length almost in half. So it's just going to be two little legs sticking out the side. They're still going to move. They're not going to have as much movement as if they were super long, but they're going to move enough to make it look like real legs. And the tail, the tail I match up to the how long my hook is. So I try to make it as long as what the hook, the shank is. That way I get some more spread to it. Spanflex kind of floats. It looks really cool in the water. It also gives more of a buggy look to it. Now you're almost done. I'm just literally going to flip the fly just so we can finish the last process. Last process is to make a wing case. I'm making this wing case so that way when I'm tying in, instead of tying a wing case on there and crowding this area, I have more of a hook gap. I can hook up hopefully on more fish with this, but I'll add a little bit more slickness to it in the top. And all I'm doing is just trimming some of the bugginess off of the dubbing. To make the wing casing, I found that Solarez Flex tends to be a little bit nicer, and what I normally do is try to get some of the air bubbles out first, and then I lay a little wing case layer, and I'll let that kind of settle in there because it's actually a Flex seal. It's not really like a heavy coating, and I'm going to hit it with the UV light, and the UV light hopefully cures it pretty quickly. Depending on the power and of the lamp you got, it'll be quick, faster. And then the second to last step is just taking your marker and putting a black dot right up the line to signify like the wing case. It's used in a perdigon. It's used in some other different flies where they put a little bit of the black line going up there to signify the wing casing. And I'm just going to take some bone dry Solarez just to seal it, make it look a little bit more presentable in the water, and also secure any of the other residue on there so it dries quickly. And I'm going to hit that again with the light. Now, most of the time with a smaller lamp, this UV lamp isn't. It's actually about the same size I use currently. You can get several lamps out there. The Loon lamp is probably one of the easiest, most user-friendly, just to use on any kind of UV light and any UV resin. I know a lot of guys talk about just taking it out in the sun and letting it sit, but when you get a cloudy day, you need a light. And when that's done and over with, you got a completely finished fly. Took pretty quick to do. It's not a ton of steps. And how to use this fly, when you're Euro nymphing, this is your anchor fly. This fly just basically rides just like this in the water. I use a heavier hook size to keep this fly, to keep actually where I'm targeting the trout, or I'm targeting a fish. I want to keep the The material on the fly, like I try to make sure that my legs and everything when I'm fishing it are facing the way they should. Every once in a while, with Spam Flex, it does like to slip a little bit. And as you can tell, that slipped right there. You can see it on that side there. You can just pull it right over, and sometimes it will pop back, other times it won't, and other times it's my fault for making it look that way. Having a perfect looking fly doesn't mean that you're going to catch more fish than having a buggy looking fly. So the buggier can look like just taking a little dub brush and brushing this out, and even with your fingers just pulling it out a little bit, it's going to create just enough of the dubbing to show, just like that. I just pulled out just a little bit, and that can cause your fly to even be more effective on the water. Again, this is a simple anchor pattern. It's nothing that you can use it for steelhead, you use it for trout. You can use it up on the Salmon River. You can use it down up in Erie for steelhead, and you can also use it, in your normal typical trout streams. So that's the first fly that I'll be doing. The second fly, which is the Frenchie, is tied on a jig hook. And the Frenchie has been around for a long time. A lot of guys use these flies. When I'm taking out clients on the water, most of them know what a Frenchie is, and they already start talking about, I know what that is. That looks like a pheasant tail. Honestly, the Frenchie really much is just a pheasant tail with some flash. It's very tied, very similar. With a jig hook on there, same style jig hook. Again, I go a little bit heavier of a bead, and the bead is, I use a copper bead for my Frenchies. Some guys like using gold beads. I don't know if the gold and copper makes a whole lot of a difference. What makes a difference is my fly getting down to where that fish is. If I can get that fly down to the fish, I'm going to catch that fish for a majority of the time. If I can't get that fly down to them where they're at, they're probably just going to go by and not even look at it. So getting it down in the strike zone, I'm going to start the same exact spot right in the middle of the shank and just work my way back. And I'm going to stop it right at the bend and cut the thread out. And then I'm going to grab some pheasant tail, which when I tie my Frenchie, I tie what most people see as a pattern that Lance Egan and some of the other guys, they started using their pheasant tail. They use different colors. A lot of guys I've seen it tied in purple, I've seen it tied in pink, not the pheasant tail, but purple and yellow. The Frenchie can be mimicking a lot of things in the water, but at the same time it doesn't really look like anything because of the color that you use on the collar. It's just mainly to, hey, look at me, come check me out, I'm edible maybe, come grab me. You take your pheasant tail, pretty simple. I always measure it up. Sometimes I like it even, sometimes I don't. I tend to, I'm not undecisive, but at the same time when I'm tying, I kind of tie to be quick. But if you can tell, like looking at the barbs and the fibers, I will grab the tip there and pull out the ones that are not lined up as much. And that will leave me with at least a nice pointed tail. Now, to measure your pheasant tail, to measure like the actual tail point, I know a lot of guys are like, well, I like a longer tail. I like a shorter tail. I tend to like a tail that is about the length of my shank. Some mayflies, if you ever look at a mayfly under the water, they can have long tails. But it's very, very rare that you see a pheasant, a mayfly nymph with a, two length of a tail. Most of them, unless you're looking at tricos that are already, adult tricos, most of your mayfly nymphs, their tails are going to be pretty short, close to the actual body. So I'm going to do the same method here. Pinch wrap. And I'm just going to secure it just so I don't break anything there. Now, one method is if you kind of make a little bit of a boo-boo on your tail and you're like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why it's off to the side. If you take one wrap underneath of it and then bring it over top, it will bring that tail right on top of the hook there. And then you don't have to keep searching where the center of that tail is. So it just rides directly off the back of the hook. The securing wire, I'm using UTC wire, and I'm using the brassy copper. I'm going to secure this. Again, I tie all my wires and stuff onto the side, just so I can get a decent wrap in the start. And this wire is not that thick enough to really make that much of a difference. And I'm going to bring that and advance it all the way up to the head. Now, I started using, you know, some things. Of course, I just lost a feather on that. I lost another one. I'm just going to retie in there because it just broke off several of them. So I'm just going to cut this and just put a slip in there. Which, when that happens, normally it's like, it's time to look at getting a new pheasant tail. Because either the bugs got it, or you know, it's old, it's rotten. So, trick I've learned is, if that does happen, don't cut your tail off. You just wasted time. Tie in the top part here, and tie in the thickest part, so that way when you're tying in, it doesn't break off on you. And you're going to just bring that all the way back. And then advance your thread there. And then all I'm doing is just wrapping the pheasant tail up. And I use a pinch method that tends to work and keep everything nice and straight. And I don't have to use sometimes the tools to lock everything in and, you know, cause more frustration because you break stuff off on it. And I just end enough in there so I can put a nice collar. So cut off the pheasant tail, and I'm going to wrap my wire up counterclockwise, differently than what I just did my pheasant tail, so it actually secures it. That's one of the main reasons you do that. And I don't know if anybody has seen Santal or know who Santal is. He actually showed me a little trick. I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but you wrap your thread around the wire twice, bring it up in, it cinches it down, and then we just do the wiggle. You just wiggle it right off. It will break it right away. It leaves nothing for your scissors to clip. It just cuts it right then and there, which makes it so much easier. Again, this fly is basically a pheasant tail just with a collar, and it's called the Frenchie. And one of the biggest things that I do with my collars, a lot of guys use the orange thread. They already tied in the orange thread right here. I do not. The reason why I do not is because I tie these as fast as I can. I tie as many as I can. I'm sitting down at the vise and tying up a couple dozen. And if I got to keep changing threads, that's more thread that now I have to change out. I got to retie in, I got to restart. If everything from start to finish is the same, I can do a couple dozen faster than what I could if I have to change everything out. So I'm going to take, it's a UV shrimp ice dub. And definitely the UV part of it is what causes the look. It kind of looks semi-orange, but when you hit it with a UV light, it has more of a shrimpish looking color to it. And this is where you can kind of experiment. Some guys like their collars really, really tight. Other guys that I know, they use a very loose collar to apply. And as they wrap up, you can tell if you've put too much on. And if you put too much on it, I just want to show this because this is like one thing. If you just pull down on the material, you get just a ball of material right here. You just pull that right off. You don't have to get frustrated yourself, untie and redo it. I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. And my collar stays nice. I give it a couple thread wraps right here. And I'm just going to whip finish. If I can keep it right in the lock. There we go. And then I'm done with that. Break off the excess thread. Instead of using my scissors. And I got my Frenchie that I use on pretty much every trout stream. You can use these for steelhead up in Erie. I tend to do really well in the Little Juniata, any freestone stream where you find a lot of wild trout. This is kind of a go-to for fish that have seen multiple things, multiple flies. This is kind of one that's like a hybrid of, hey, it has a classic, but it also has another entry of just exposure of a different color on it. And it allows just a little bit more of a look and a finished look. Now, a lot of guys tend to put head cement on their flies. The question that I've always had when I'm putting head cement on my flies is, how do you do it when you have a collar there that you're just trying to hide? Ways around it is when you're wrapping your thread on there, that last wrap before you do a whip finish or something, you just run some head cement up there, do your whip finish, and you're done. Other guys, they take a little needle and they just kind of dab it in there, and that allows it to stay secure. I tend not to use a whole lot of head cement on jig flies because I just haven't lost enough material on them. However, what I've found works the best is any Flex Seal or the Bone Dry. You just take a dab, and where I found the dab goes is right at the little slot. It works the best. And you just make a little tiny dab in there, and it just kind of coats that whole entire fly. And then you'll hit it with the UV light. And it's kind of crazy that it took me like several flies to mess up and cover my eye and coat my eye with head cement to figure out that just a tiny dab of this Bone Dry right on the collar part where the slot is, it will just literally run right down the where you actually put your whip finish in and tie it off. And I'm just going to make sure that it stays cured here for a sec. And it's cured. And that's the second fly. Again, this is the Frenchie. All the materials that we are using here tonight are materials that we have in both shops. So the last and final fly, I have a fly that I've been fishing for I would say a little bit longer than any Euro nymphing style, but it's anyone that's ever gone out with me, anyone that's ever fished with me, they know I use a lot of eggs. I literally use so many egg flies. And a lot of that is because I had one of my mentors turn me on to an egg pattern that we call pink and orange. It literally is just a clown fly, very similar to like a Y2K. And I'm using in Tiemco, this would be like a $24.99, so a caddis or an egg hook, just a 3X heavy wire. Down eye, guys ask me, well, do you like the straight eye or down eye? I tend to like the down eye in my smaller hooks, but then when I go to a bigger hook like a size 10 for steelhead, I like a straight eye. And part of that reason is I think it's easier for me to find the hole of the eye of the hook for a down eye for 6X tippet or 5X tippet than it is for steelhead fly when I'm using a size 10 hook anyways. That's just kind of always been my theory on that. Nothing wrong with it, it's just, it's something that I started doing. I'm going to use a UTC thread 140 white, and I'm just going to start it right in the middle. And I'm just going to bring it back very short because I don't need the whole entire hook. I don't need to wrap anything other than just a couple wraps on these on this the McFly foam. So I use two colors. I use the pink. There's several. If you look at McFly foam, they literally have so many colors that you're like, well, that's just pink. There's one called January. This is January, and then this is I think this is Steely Orange. They have other colors. They have peach. They have all these other different colors out there. I tend to find that the orange, it doesn't always have to be one color orange. The biggest color that I think when it comes down to pink, just as long as it's a pale looking pink. It doesn't have to be a solid, heavy looking high pink. There's like I said, in McFly foam, there's literally a lot of different colors. Sometimes it's all about finding the color that tends to not be as bright to make it look more like a realistic egg. However, this doesn't really look like a realistic egg. I mean, it's two-tone color. When you have the finished product, it just looks just like a fluff ball or pom-pom on an egg, on a hook. But for some reason, this colorway has worked several times when nothing else has worked. So I always tend to say, when you get the McFly foam, you're going to get this really thick strand like this. You want to pull that in half. And that's where you want to start with your first color. And then when you get to the pink, you do the same thing. And what you get is a thinner color so you can almost blend it a little bit better. So we're only making one wrap just to secure it. And then another wrap just to make sure it stays on top. And then Bob Clouser Jr. up at Bass Pro Shop showed me a couple different tricks. At one point in time, he showed me like how he secures his. I just have kind of adapted what he's done and now start doing a little bit different technique. I first take it and bring it secured in the front, and then I secure it into the back. And I only secure it a couple wraps in the back. And in the process of securing it in the back, I wrap it up like I'm almost tying a parachute post. And what that does, that keeps that material on there. So I don't have to worry about it pulling off the hook. And as you start catching more fish with these, they can start falling apart. So it's best that when you're fishing these, you secure the material in because it's easy just to lose that material. This is a fly that takes very, very less material. It takes less time to tie it. If you get into a rhythm, you can really go to town. Especially those that are steelhead guys out there, guys that are want to experience some trout flies. This is an easy fly to tie. It's literally two major materials that you tie on the hook, and then your thread, and that's it. So I'm going to do my whip finish. And I'm just going to cut the excess thread off. And this is where I've learned just a tiny dab of resin on there will keep it all from unraveling on you, because sometimes it has a habit of, your whip finish or your hitch, your clinch knot, they tend to unravel on you after so many times of hooking on fish or being on your line. So I'm going to hit this with a UV light just to cure that real quick. And it should be pretty cure there. The last moment that we make like the actual egg, this is, looking at it, you're like, what in the world is this? And it's just, you got to really do the math of cutting it. If you cut it down here, you have this tiny little puff, and it doesn't look like anything. You cut it up top here, it looks like it has a bad hairdo. And so that's why I find, like, normally I measure it based on, if this is a size 16, I normally use in the middle of the frame, so I cut right in the middle of it, and it fluffs out. Now, you give it a little bit of a perm and push it around a little bit, it looks like a big jumbo mess, which it's totally fine to look like a big jumbo mess. As you look underneath of it, there's a gap, and again, that's totally fine. What the fish will see is this in the water. They will see this in the water, and they really don't see the gap underneath. They see just the top part of it, and it mimics that egg look. Again, I don't know why this works so well when it comes down to trout fishing. It has been one of those secret go-to flies that I've used for a very long time. Again, one of my fly fishing mentors, he started off with this fly with me, you know, when I was probably about 15 or 16 years old, and we started dissecting this fly from size 10 all the way to size 18. And in low water conditions, when nothing else is working, this can work. And it's kind of like everyone's little secret fly that you know, everyone has out there, like a zebra midge, or some guys use a mop fly and stuff. So this is kind of like my version of a mop fly when nothing else is working. But yet normally I start off with this fly. It's the fly that I put on my tag when I'm Euro nymphing, and I'll have my anchor fly. I found, like, in a lot of your creeks that are spring fed, the closer these flies are together in ratio of where you tie them on, the better this fly will act under the water. So this will sink a little bit faster. This will also get down deeper. And when you're in limestone territory, you tend to find your second tag fly does a little bit of this in and out. Like, it doesn't stay down with the rest of the flies. And it allows it to be a little bit harder of a fishing aspect. Once you get this fly closer to your anchor fly, this turns into a magic. You'll feel the hit then, and you won't miss fish. So those are the 3 flies. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to, you know, Precision and their crew, and we can definitely hook you up with their materials and you know, go further with you know, just if you have questions on how to tie everything on. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and I appreciate your time.